Hey, my friends, welcome once again to the Everyday Missionary Podcast, and yes, this is episode 300, baby, 300. I should have Leonidas and the Spartans and that whole Sparta, but no, I don't have that. I don't have poppers or streamers or balloons or horns or trumpeters or any of that stuff. No, I just have the number 300, but still that seems to be a milestone. I was trying to remember, I think I started the podcast back in 2017, which is kind of fun for me. I think I started the podcast just shortly before we submitted our original paperwork to the city for our building project. So that always kind of sticks. Like, oh, that fall going into December time was when we started it, and this was this long haul, and now 300 episodes later, we're going to have a building. That's almost irony right there, especially since I haven't done an episode every single week for those 300. There was breaks and time in between, and so that's just a long haul all the way around. Not a lot of people maybe stick with this particular project that long. I don't always know fully why. I think I enjoy it. That's ultimately why I do it. I think this is a medium that gives me the opportunity to share or teach or ask questions or ponder from a different perspective in ways that I would never do on Sunday mornings. I kind of see what Sunday does as one thing, what the podcast does is another thing. And the podcast is fun because it really is kind of maybe a jack of all trades, master of none in some ways. There's more to that quote that's actually pretty positive, but I can stop it there and say this is just really to go like, hey, here's a thought. Let's kick it around. Here's a way of seeing something different. Let's kind of spin that one up. And today, though, I wanted to do something a little bit different for the 300th episode. If I can spit that out, the 300th episode. I wanted to do something that was genuinely in the spirit of kind of how to be an everyday missionary. Like, I just wanted to kind of honor the title as it is, and something that I've been thinking about increasingly in my own life too, and that is how to start, how to begin, how to lay the foundation of a Jesus intriguing conversation. Like in everyday life, right? Like, so you at work, or you at school, or you working with the PTA, or you a part of your Zumba group, or you a part of whatever you do, your Jeeping club, or you name your thing, you're a part of a, dog walking group. I don't know what the thing is, but in those spaces when you're maybe rubbing shoulders with people that are either estranged from Jesus, once having been a part of the stuff of Jesus, never been around the Jesus stuff, whatever it is, like how can you start literally like these Jesus intriguing conversations, right? So this is all about how do we get to the place of wanting to share this good news of Jesus in the lives of people, but doing it in a way that seems very human, normal, natural, everyday-ish, right? Because I was thinking about this when I first was introduced to Christianity. I remember the way I was trained in evangelism was as otherworldly as perhaps the very ministry of Jesus itself, right? In other words, there was a sense of like the way we know we've been effective in our evangelism is that we were bold, we were aggressive, we were unapologetic, we said it like it was. And so we would use these tools to train that or use opportunities to go do that. And don't get me wrong, I think that there are outliers in some of those tools that's exactly what worked, right? But I think for every person it did work, there was a person or maybe 3, 4, 5 people it didn't work with. And it didn't work with not because they're hard-hearted and they're uninterested in Jesus, but because the delivery mechanism, the tool or the kind of the functionality of what we were trying to accomplish was not tailored to real regular life. It just almost felt like too abrasive. And so let me give an example of what I mean. I'm going to give you 2 before I get into kind of my thoughts for the day. So one was actually when I was in high school ministry, and we would go every summer to our summer camp in California. So we actually went to Point Loma Nazarene College. We used the college for our summer camp for a week. It was epic, great views, going to the beach every day, everything else. But in going to the beach, they said you had to go down the beach for an hour and a half and just do cold calling evangelism to people out on the beach, right? So they would equip us, here's the strategic stuff you do, here's the words you say, you ask this question, whatever it might be, like if you were to die today, why would God let you into his heaven kind of thing? And so then we would go down the beach and go to do this evangelism thing. And what was interesting is, like, I remember so vividly going to this one person and be like standing over them, and I go, if you were to die today, why would God let you into their heaven? And they looked up at me and they waved their hand and they're like, bro, you're in my son, right? And they were just like, go pound sand, man. Like, I'm here at the beach to relax. I'm not here to have existential questions about the afterlife and that kind of thing. And I get that. Now, again, I think it was well intended. I think there are occasions where somebody is moved by that. And I think if you just look from the perspective of, hey, is God given credit and honor by openly sharing his message without any kind of lack of courage, you could say, hey, that's a point on the board in that sense. But I think in putting that point on the board, there's also the risk of needlessly turning people off when they may actually be warm to things if it's hit from a different point of view. Now, when I share that story, that was like 35, 40 years ago almost, some of that stuff that was done. And I think since then, there is a more jaded view of religion. Certainly, we know that Christianity, because of the press and the internet, and that there are no more secrets, there's a lot of our dirty laundry has been aired, a lot of abuse, misuse, financially, sexually, all this stuff. Like, Christianity does have a pretty steep hill that it's climbing up right now in society. So all the more those cold calls like that are just off-putting for people. They're just like, oh, here's a weird religious fanatic that I don't even know come into my door or whatever else, which maybe that's even an example that I would use in our own lives. Like, are you super stoked that the Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, the Mormons come to your door, or whatever else? Like, you're not open. You're not primed to have a great conversation. It has a very different feel to it, right? And so I think those old tools, part of that is to go, how do we retire some of these old tools and have some new, maybe a little bit more useful, a little bit more humanized type tools that we can use in our everyday space, right? So that was kind of one example from my distant past. The other is that I then eventually, as a lead pastor, was trained in something called Evangelism Explosion. It was out of D. James Kennedy's ministry down in Coral Ridge Church in Florida. And this was like, again, like these strategic questions that you're armed with to ask people. But they're questions that, especially in this day and age, as soon as they're asked, there is suspicion, there is a bit of surliness, or like what's your agenda with me? Like I'm being sold. Like, it feels like multi-level marketing or Amway or whatever. Like, there's not like I'm going to lean in and I want to pay attention to this. It's more like in this mode of defensiveness. Like, I don't know, you weird religious people, or I don't know if I want to have this conversation, or I don't know, are you judging me right now? Are you loving me right now? What's going on here right now? And so those old tools that many of us were trained in are perhaps not the best way to do some of this stuff today. And so as I was thinking about that and thinking about it in my own life, especially as I'm more and more, like, especially working at the gym and having conversations, and it's such a great new world to be in, right? Like, to be out of the fishbowl, out of the salt shaker, into the world, into the actual aquatic life of all sorts of other people that have different views. I'm constantly thinking, like, man, how can I get to these places of conversation, right? And ones where it's intriguing for the person, as opposed to, oh my goodness, here's the weird religious person asking me religious questions, right? Because I really do believe that the most effective way for people to become followers of Jesus is going to be that they're kind of drawn in, they are persuaded in this kind of curious, interested way, right? And so that's why I'm saying it's kind of Jesus intriguing conversations. Like, how do we do some of that? And so I'm going to give you 10 things. Yes, 10 things. I almost never on the podcast do 10 ways or reasons or approaches to doing this, but these are ones I wrote down recently, and I thought, hey, I'm going to do this for episode 300. Now, some of these are just laying groundwork. So to be honest, not every one of these is an actionable item in the sense of, hey, ask this question, do this thing, make this statement, throw this hook in the water, right? But I do think that laying the foundation is also, or like kind of preparing the soil, so to speak, in even your own person is a part of the process here too. And so I've got them in front of me written down. I'm going to kind of read these as we go and then expound on it a little bit. This won't be a super long thing, but I wanted to get this out there as rapidly as possible, especially now that the weather's changing. It seems like in the Pacific Northwest, as it gets nicer, you find yourselves at sporting events on the sideline more. You find yourself out in the community more, walking the trail, being in town, stopping at CC's, whatever the thing might be, hanging out at the pub, talking to other people. And it's like kind of in that world, as well as work and school and all the other places, you can think about some of these things. And so 10 ways to try to create Jesus intriguing conversations in some capacity. The first thing I'm going to say is this. You want to pray. You want to pray for awareness for those kinds of conversations, right? And I think part of this is not simply like, hey, asking God to supernaturally open those doors, though I think that's certainly part of what prayer is doing. But I think there's another part to this is when you're praying about something that is important to you, it becomes important kind of almost behind the scenes in your thinking, right? So your subconscious then is like turned on because it's like, hey, this is something important. They keep bringing it up. We're going to lock this back here. And it almost begins to change your field of vision in some ways. And so going from like not looking for open doors to those conversations to, ooh, that's a way I can kind of put my finger around the door a little bit and maybe open the door a little to a conversation that maybe they weren't open to. I wouldn't have been open to maybe historically, but now I want to be open to. Just that idea alone, right? Just like praying for the open door, which is interesting because Paul talks about that, like praying for an open door. And in the same way, it's kind of like you wanting to do that so that you are ready for that opportunity as it might arrive, right? And it may be a very subtle thing. It may be a very abrupt thing. And actually, in one of the points later, you're going to find out it may be something where you go, the very thing I don't want to hear because it's critical may be the very opportunity for you to kind of slip that finger around the door and maybe bring it open just a little bit in the life of a person. So that's the first thing, man. Just be praying for awareness when it comes to maybe these conversations as they come. The second thing that I think is really important in the preparation phase is really finding ways to make this personally important to you. And what I mean by that, in part, is you thinking through how is it that you would like to present the faith that is dear to you? And then in that, how would you maybe word that for the people that are around you that you're trying to have those conversations with, right? And this has two parts. This is part being a student of yourself, and in part it's being a student of the people that are around you. Because most of the time, these conversations are going to happen with people that are at some level an acquaintance all the way into like a friend or family member or whatever else. It's rarely going to be like a true cold call. It can be on occasion. I'll get into where that might play out in a couple of places. But by and large, it's going to be somebody that you have some level of connection with. And so you're going to know your friend group. You're going to know your social kind of network, if you will, and be thinking like, what is the language that people in my sphere of influence tend to use? What are biases that they may have that are not bad biases, like good biases, right? So whatever it might be, you know that there's certain hobbies that all kind of bond them together, or there's certain dispositions that they kind of have. And then you're being a student of that. You go, okay, I know the language that they use. I know the language that they don't use. Maybe if you catch little nuances of some of their issues with religion or whatever else, you kind of log that like, oh, they have an attitude about that. And I get that, like that may be fair, or no, that's not fair. And I'm going to try to figure out ways to try to offset that and disrupt the stereotype, but I'm going to be students of them. Right? Because part of what we're doing is being missionaries. And if you look at good, effective missionaries, when they go into a culture, they learn about that culture so they can use the nature of that culture. Again, the nomenclature and the familiarity and the different iconic things, they leverage that to then have these Jesus intriguing conversations, which is way more how missionaries work, right? They don't come into a culture assuming that, you know what, they know all the Christianese and we're all on the same page and we understand the world the same way. No, they come in as radical students and then they figure out, what are the little ways I can tag into this? In fact, this is one of the most brilliant things in the book of Acts, chapter 17, when Paul rolls in to Athens and he's there at Mars Hill and he's trying to figure out, how do I bridge the gap? And there he's quoting their philosophers and their poets, and he's giving them credit to even one of their shrines on the hillside. I mean, like this unknown God thing, let me tell you about him. In other words, Paul doesn't walk in and say, you know what, I'm going to speak nothing but Hebrewese. I'm going to speak Jewishese, and that's it. He's like, no. Matter of fact, he gets a little worked up at first, like, oh, look at all these pagan things. And then he's like, wait a minute. The goal is to reach people, not smash people. And so he becomes just this really on-the-fly student and then leverages all the stuff he knows about them and their way of life and how they see things. And then he then figures out a way to port into that like a very Jesus intriguing conversation. And some listen, some blow him off. But you know what? He's done a good job on that, right? And so that's a part of it. The other thing I said in that, though, was you being a student of you. And what I think about here is what makes your faith dear to you? Right? Because I find in some of the evangelism training that we would have historically, it was like this canned thing, like a one size fits all. Here's the thing you say, here's the answer you give, here's the question you pop. But it wasn't authentic to the person. So sometimes people would do these things that just sound so unlike them, it becomes uncomfortable right from the get-go. This is where you have to figure out, hey, this is the thing that really makes my faith tick, and kind of leaning into that, right? It's kind of like knowing who you are and then working through the way that you would like to share that with other people if those things come up. And therefore, you're kind of armed with a sharing point, not an apologetic answer, not necessarily some kind of, I don't know, like belief statement, like you're trying to outline a doctrinal model, just more like, hey, here's why this matters to me. So like in my world, I was literally just having this conversation the other day with somebody where they're like, why are you even a Christian? Like, come on, you got to admit there's this and this and this and this and this. They had this kind of list of things where they're like, why would you stay with this? For me to be able to be like, you know what? I can't answer every one of those things. I see your point on some of those things. We may differ on other things, but you know what? I just find that my life is better with Jesus. The person was like, oh, well, that's good for you, man. That's cool. But it decelerated kind of the, why are you such an anti-intellectual that believes in a make-believe God who lives in the sky, right? Like it just changed the nature, and it personalized, it humanized, it just said, hey, from my psyche, at least, can you meet me there? My psyche, this helps my psyche. They can understand that. And that was a bonding agent. They go, oh, I can get that. I understand how we all maybe embrace things that is good for our psyche. And then that creates a Jesus intriguing conversation. Again, maybe that particular one leaves with just, okay, we don't agree, or I disagree with you and you disagree with me. That's fine. But hey, at least I connected with you at a human level. And from that, there was a level of like insight, or again, I think intrigue, right? So it's you knowing you and how you want to share the dearest part of your faith for you. And then you want to understand them or the group that you're with so that you can kind of understand, hey, these are ways to speak to them. These are commonalities that we share. These are places that we can bond. Like, this is just a quick sidebar for that. But one of the things I loved about the heyday of the Seahawks is that when you were in the general area of Seattle, like most everybody was like a Seahawks fan. Like, you might disagree on politics and economic policy and all these different things, gun control, you name it, you might disagree. But the Seahawks brought us together, and you could yell and cheer and shout and high five with a sworn enemy in some ways. And that little bond of commonality can create lowering walls, right? And so that's why you're always looking for those places of commonality. And then from that, you learn the language, learn the attitude, learn the vibe, learn the worldview, whatever it is. And then you're figuring out, how can I take my heart for a thing and kind of interact or share in relationship to that in ways that they're going to hear, because it's not the typical language that they would hear about religious things or Jesus things or Christian things or faith things, right? It's kind of like that. So that's kind of the second thing. And that's kind of laying the groundwork for stuff, right? Here's the third one. And this one is oftentimes low-hanging fruit, all right? People will share hard things in life sometimes, right? So somebody will come into work, or somebody will come into your workout class or whatever it is. They have contact with you, and you can see it's written on them. They're having a rough day. There's something going on in their life, and you inquire, right? You're just like, hey, you doing okay today? Now, they may say, it's nothing, and they don't want to share it. Or they may say, I'm having this issue with my kid, 17, found out that they're struggling with self-harm, or, whatever the thing is, because people have stuff in life. And when somebody does that, a real simple thing to do, and I've done this with people before at the gym, I'll say, I don't know about you, but I'm the praying type, and I just want you to know I'm going to be praying for you. That's it. I don't know about you, I'm the praying type, and so just, I want to be praying for you. In fact, I remember one time I was literally at the gym at 3:30 a.m. in the morning, right? And because I get up uniquely early on Sunday and go to the gym, and then I kind of put my last thoughts together for a talk, and then I go to church. And I just happened to be a little earlier on that particular morning, and so this guy came in, and you could tell that just things were weighing on him, And so I went over, I'm like, dude, people that are here at 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning, we're the weirdos. So my name's Matt. Nice to meet you. And he told me his name, and he goes, yeah, it's just really hard in my life right now. I just needed to work off some stuff because we have a little one that was just born in the last 6 months, and they're having all of these health issues, and we just don't even know what to do. We're just at wit's end, and I just needed to vent some frustration. And so I just did that thing. I'm like, hey, I don't know about you, but I'm the praying type. And just so you know, I'm going to be praying for you. And then I went out of my way to make sure to come into the gym a few other times early in the morning like that, hoping to see that person. And they were there. And I just would say, hey, just checking on your little one. How they doing? Just want to let you know again, still praying for them or whatever else. And like the third time, they were just like, can I say just thank you for that? Like, I appreciate that you actually took the time to let me know that you're praying for my kid. And it's just a little thing like that. Now, that might lead to other things. It may not lead to other things, but it's still a little way that you can put that out there. It's like a safe hook in the water that doesn't feel threatening, doesn't feel like here's just a religious person that's wanting something from me, but rather here's a person that wants something for me. And that's kind of what that thing does. It says, I want something for you, and I'm just letting you know that part of my way of doing life is I'm a person that talks to God, and I'm going to be talking to God for you because I care about you, right? I'm thoughtful to you. And that's just a simple way to do it. And again, you can do that at school, at work, in volunteerism, whatever it is. When you have somebody sharing something that's hard, just be like, hey, I'm the praying type. I just want to let you know I'm going to be praying for you. Now, some people may be offended at that and say, like, do me a favor, don't pray because God doesn't care. He's cursed me, whatever else. And even there, you get an opportunity to say, I totally get it. Right? Maybe you've even been in that space. Like, I've been there too. I get it. I've had that kind of struggle, and I totally appreciate where you're coming from, and just want to let you know, though, I care about you, love you, and that's the thing I know for sure I can do for you, and I just want to let you know I was doing that. So even then, you can take the criticism with grace, and that models something. Like, instead of getting defensive or like, fine, then I won't pray for you, right? Like, to go like, I totally get it. I felt very abandoned maybe by God too at times. It's a normal thing. In fact, I would go so far as to say there's a lot of people in the Bible that felt very abandoned by God at times. That's a normal human response. And to validate, that's a normal human response. That's something they don't expect from a person of faith or religion. And so all the more, hook in the water. So that's number 3. Here's the 4th one, and this one's like a cautionary one, but not cautionary like you shouldn't do it, just the way you do it, you want to be cautious, right? But it's the idea of, maybe you're talking about giving at the office. It's a charity thing or whatever it is. Anytime you get a chance to share with people that there's a charity you're a part of that you care deeply about is an opportunity to create a Jesus intriguing conversation. So maybe you're talking with people or whatever else, and all you say is, yeah, it's actually really cool. My family has supported a young woman with Compassion International for the last 8 years, because just in our faith tradition, it's just really important to kind of care for the least of these. Like, that's just a simple passing way of doing it. Like, hey, we really enjoy this charity we're a part of. You could even invite the person to the charity, right? Because it isn't always just religious specific, but we really have this charity we care about. We support this person. And again, it's just really important to our faith tradition to care about the least of these, to care about widows and orphans, whatever phrasing you might use. But that's a way to create a Jesus intriguing conversation. In fact, it was funny. Just this week, I launched this hey, give me ideas for sermon topics, for topics that people would be wanting to invite another person to, and the person might come. That was kind of the idea. And so shout out to my man, Michael Cairns, because he sent this one to me. He sent me some ideas that were really good from him. And he goes, then I asked my friend, who isn't really like a church-going person, to give me some ideas. And he goes, they actually just went to AI and asked the question of AI, and then AI generated some things. But he's like, actually, that was pretty thoughtful. Like, and I agree with him. That was brilliant on the part of his friend to be like, I'm going to ask AI, what are topics that maybe people would come to? And the majority of the topics where people would come to listen to sermons or messages or series that were about generosity, right? So instead of it like like you go back 15, 20, 30 years ago, the seeker thing was always about good marriages, good parenting, good whatever. The new trend, and I think this is spot on, the new trend is people want to go, how is your church giving back? How is your church humanitarian? How is your church generous? How is your church not making it about them and their organization and their programs, but they're making it about others, and they're leveraging their stuff for the sake of others? And so what's increasingly important to people is, man, how is this going to be, even like in the free market, how is this going to be both both capitalistic, but also is going to be giving back? How is it going to make money, but it's going to better humanity in the process? So it's not just about the almighty dollar, but it's rising the tide of all ships. And so the more you leverage your involvement with charity, your love of charity, how you want to see others maybe involved in charities that are important to you, and then in that you're sharing because in my faith tradition it's important, or because I'm a follower of Jesus and Jesus made a big deal about those who are down and out and forgotten and disenfranchised and were suffering injustice, and so I care about that. That's a great hook in the water to bind something that many people care about, right? They care about humanitarianism. And then you're saying my humanitarianism isn't driven by just simply humanism. It's driven by my relationship to Jesus and my living in the pattern of life that he set for me. That's a great way to do it. And so again, share a charity you're involved in, and then how Jesus is the catalyst for you to be a part of that. Number 5, here's a simple phrase: at church last weekend. Right? That's one. That enough can be something that can start an interesting conversation, because many of us, we go off into our world and people don't know we're like regular, faithful church attenders, that we are serious about our walk with Jesus or whatever else. And just that little thing, and I'm going to maybe tether it with being the kind of person that doesn't come across as the holier than thou religious person, right? When you're just like a regular, kind, normal person, and then you go, hey, I go to church. That can throw some people off in a positive, like, oh, I wouldn't have seen you as the church-going type kind of thing, right? And then that gives you an opportunity to be like, yeah, I became a Christian when I was 15, and Jesus has just always been important to me. And like in my world, I just find that life is better with Jesus. When my life is falling apart, it's better to be doing it his way than to do it my own way. And so, that's a casual, normal human conversation. So just that little phrase, at church this last weekend, when you're talking to somebody at the, quote, water cooler, can give them a sense of, oh, I see you have a priority in life, that this is important to you. Matter of fact, I was talking to a friend of mine. It was really interesting in the tech community here in the greater area. And he goes, most of the people in my company think if you go to church, you're broken. And so they assume that nobody that works here would go to church because only broken weirdos or MAGA people or whatever go to church. And so they saw that simple phrase as a way to open a door, because they'd be like, what? No, dude, you go to church. Nobody here goes to church. We don't go to church around here. We're intellectuals. We've all gone to college. We all know science. How could you go to church? And that's a good disruption of a stereotype that any one of us can do in whatever space we're in, right? And it's not threatening or anything else. It just puts it out there. And you never know. With that simple little thing, they may go, well, what church do you go to? I get that one a lot. What church do you go to? That's a great way to do it. And so that's another way that you can kind of get into those little nooks and crannies to start a conversation. Here's another one. Number 6, bring thoughtful or conversational, provoking books with you to work or to some event, or while you're sitting at your kid's dance class or whatever else. Just have that there. But I mean, thought-provoking, I don't mean like thought-provoking offensive or thought-provoking jabby, or just trying to be like difficult for difficult sake or whatever else. Like have a Love Does by Bob Goff. Like, that's a fun one. Like, Love Does, what is that all about? Well, it's all about like trying to figure out how we can love people as radically as possible, because that's the best way to really change kind of the needle in their life in some way. And then you can explain what the book's all about and go, it's really at its core about, hey, Jesus says to love God and love neighbors, and I want to be the best human I can be, both to God and to my neighbors. And so this book, Love Does, just really helps me to think about how can I love all the people in my life, the easy to love, the tough to love, the thoroughly unlovely. What a great reminder for me. Or bring your Bible with you, right? Just bring your Bible. That can be a conversation starter. In fact, I remember this one story of a guy that was a high executive in a company. I was talking to him about it, and he's like, I bring my Bible to work every day. And first it started up on the shelf, and then it moved down underneath my shelf, and now it's out on my desk. And now people are like, okay, that Bible's been moving around. So it's not just a book on your shelf you never deal with, but it's out, and I think he had it open. And people are like, so you're like a successful executive. What's with the Bible? Like, isn't that like some old archaic book? And he would then have the opportunity to be like, no, this is really what governs my life every day. I read a little bit about it, gives me wisdom for life, reminds me of my own humanness in both the bad and how I want to be a better human in the good. Because again, it's just important. I think faith and family and values is important. Like, they would just do it that way. And that's a great way to do it. So you're using something iconic that causes some people to go like, huh, Because it's funny, when I get on airplanes, inevitably, I would say almost every time on an airplane, when I'm sitting next to somebody and I pull out a book, they notice the title and they ask me about the title, right? And it's an opportunity to have a conversation. Doesn't matter what it is. I tend to have kind of provocative looking titles when I read books on airplanes, and it almost always generates a conversation. You can do the same thing in your everyday life, at work, hanging out at a soccer, practice, whatever it is. It's a great way to maybe start a conversation in a passive way. You just have it floating out there like bait in the water, and maybe somebody's going to ask a question, and then you can have a really thoughtful, sensitive, caring, very human-rooted answer about why Jesus is important to you. So that's another one. Number 7, and maybe I want to say with that too, trying to always keep the Christianese out of it. I want to come back to that. I said that earlier. I want to say that again. The most important thing is realizing that our speak is tribal speak, right? And we always, when we're speaking to others, we want to make it as accessible as possible. So we want to kind of avoid the language barriers as much as possible, because again, this is about being missionaries. This isn't the idea that everybody in America is all Christians, they're all bathed in Christianity, they're Christ-haunted, so to speak, as Keller would say. No. We increasingly, we're post-Christian, and so we need to realize we need to speak in their vernacular even when we answer these simple questions. So that's that one. Number 7, when your church is having a big event or some kind of series, especially with people you have some rapport with, that's a great opportunity to invite them. Because most of the time, if it's a series that's very much like invite a friend, or if it's Easter or Christmas or whatever it is, that's oftentimes I know I try to, and I know many other churches try to make that accessible for an outsider coming in, or somebody even that is deconstructed, walked away, even that person, they're trying to make it accessible for that person. So what we find for adults that come to Jesus, the mass majority of the time, it's not their friend walked them through the 4 spiritual laws or took them through that you're on this side of a chasm and God's on that side and here's a bridge that Jesus built. Like, most adults do not do this with other adults, just being completely candid about that. What most adults do is invite a friend. And then that friend comes to church, and then they listen, and they're kind of taking it in, and they're trying to figure out, are these people like me? Does this message make sense to me? Because there's certain social as well as intellectual cues. This has all got to connect. But if that happens, that's how they go, now I want to follow Jesus. This makes sense to me. And so just those simple things that you can invite a friend to at those strategic times of the year, strategic series, especially for somebody you have some level of relationship with already. Maybe you've done some of these other things, and so it's now moving to that stage. That's a great way to do it, to create a Jesus-intriguing conversation. Next, number 8, and this is about disposition. Be the most quality, encouraging, complimentary, safe-feeling person, because then people will seek you out to be around you. And I find that. I find in my own life, those people that I find really inspiring or encouraging, or I go, man, you're just good to be around. Like, I want more of you, right? And with that too, I think there's almost inherently in us as human beings, when you have those people that you just are kind of socially connected to or attracted to from a social perspective, you start to graft in some of their vibe, right, too. And so if you're that person, they're going to want to graft in some of that vibe. And all the more, if you're that person, they're going to be intrigued, like, why are you that person? What makes you tick in that way, right? And that doesn't mean being phony or just trying to be artificial, but it means, hey, I just want to be that person that others go, man, I want to be around that. Because I think about that in particular to seeking to be like Jesus. People wanted to be around Jesus, right? The holy, perfect God in human form was attractive to people, right? That's the most wild thing to me. Like, we tend to see holiness repels, but when you get into the life of Jesus, holiness attracts, right? It attracts. And in the same way, when we're truly being holy, which is love displayed in mercy and justness, I'm going to go back to that definition out of Leviticus. When we're being that and whatever our sphere of influence is, that can be attractive to people. And then they see these things and they want to understand what makes us what we are. And then we go, man, it's because I really try to model my life after what I see in Jesus, right? Like, I look at Jesus, people wanted to be around that dude, and I try to be like Jesus in that way. I think that's a great way to do it. Next, number 9, and this one is like judo. If someone says something snarky about religion or faith or Christianity, inquire, right? So let's say you have a coworker and they're like, man, these stupid MAGA Christians or these evangelicals that want to take away all of our rights and control women and make it the Handmaid's Tale and whatever the thing is, right? They want to burn books and force us all to be a Christian nation. And, people have thoughts, right? Instead of being bothered or offended or put off or even feeling like I need to back away from that person, I need to create some distance, lean in. Lean in. That was the great thing. Even this last Sunday, I was talking about kind of grace and mercy. And it has this idea of it's leaning in to bless, especially those who may not feel terribly blessed by our faith. All the more, those are called enemies in Matthew chapter 5. And Jesus says to bless those people that are critics, don't like you, hate you, want to deal with you in a different way. Bless them. Lean in and do a good thing. So when somebody is really critical about Christianity, say, hey, I heard you say that. I'm curious. What makes you tick on that? Why are you worried about that or bothered by that? Because again, in their world, whether we think it's rational or irrational, they have a real fear of that. Or they have a real hostility to that. And to not be defensive in that, but to inquire about that can be really, really helpful to say, hey, tell me your story, maybe your frustrations with Christians. And then in that, you can even share, because I follow Jesus, right? And I would like to think that I'm not maybe those things. I try not to be maybe some of these things that concern you. Or even I see the concerns that you have, and I would have the same concerns too, if those things especially were true to all Christians. But at my church, that's not the vibe that we have. That's not the focus we have, and that kind of thing. But it's just using criticism to your advantage to create conversation, right? Using critique to create conversation, to create an open door. And then from that to be you can even let them know. I've done this with people hey, just so you know, in your world, I want to be your resident Christian. So if you have questions or concerns or frustrations, feel free to come to me. I would love to be that resource for you. I'm not going to take it personal. I'm not mad at you that you feel this way. Because that's one of the great things for me. I never take criticisms against Christianity personally. Not really. I want to use that to evaluate. Is there things we can learn, or are there things we're doing we shouldn't? Or are there things we should do that we don't? That kind of thing. But what a great opportunity to be hey, I will be your on-call Christian to go, do you all think this, right? And then I can let you know yep, we all do, or nope, we don't all think that, or whatever it is. But you're creating then an intriguing thing, because they assume that that you're as defensive against them as they are against you. And you get to be like Jesus and spin that ball and be nope, not exactly. I do things a little bit different. So cool way to do it. It's one of my favorite ways to do it. I have actually found people that were very, very hostile to me because of my association with faith, being a pastor in town, that by going to those people, because that's the other thing, I've proactively tried to go to my quote enemies in town, especially Facebook enemies. I don't know these people. They've never sat down with me. I've proactively tried to build relationships with those people. And every single time I've seen them become a friend. And even in our conversation where they go we disagree, but I really respect you that you seem to care about me and you're not fighting me in our disagreement. You seem to even respect my disagreement with you. And all the more they go, and so I respect your position in a way I never would have otherwise. That's the coolest way to do it. That's one of my favorite ways to do that. So that's number 9. And then number 10, and this one's a little bit more slightly passive, lightly active, a little bit maybe a mix of some of the others. But whatever environment you're in, be that peacemaking person. Whatever environment you're in, be that peacemaking person. So in your little world, don't ever be the recipient or the giver of gossip or slander or picking a side on a thing that really maybe no side should be picked. I mean, there's times where sides should be picked because there can be some really terrible things injustices or things that are illegal on top of being just immoral or whatever else, and you have to pick a side. But as much as possible, even in those things, to still be the peacemaker, to be kind of, I'm not, my salsa level isn't all high because of the thing. I'm trying to keep my cool because the goal of this whole gospel thing is the restoration of all things, right? God is wanting heaven and earth to touch. He's wanting shalom among the cosmos that he's made. I mean, again, that's a massive, massive theme throughout the Old Testament. I'll probably talk about that sometime in the future, that what the core of sin is the loss of shalom, the loss of peace. And so God is moving us back toward that. So every way we do that in society, every way that we find a way, grassroots level, to be peacemakers, that's Jesus intriguing, because our world is so good at division. It's so good at judgment. It's so good at criticism. It's so good at cancel culture. It's so good at kick them out if they don't agree. Whatever the thing is, right? The radical idea, the Jesus intriguing idea, is this idea of saying, hey, I'm going to be the source of peace. And when people go like, hey, why do you care about making sure that people get along as much as possible? Go, because Jesus told me, blessed are the peacemakers. James tells me that wisdom, the true essence of it, sows seeds of righteousness to reap peace, right? Like that's the whole thing. Peacemakers do that. They bring healing to the environment they're in. This is important to my faith, so this is why I do what I do. Like this is just another example of how we're trying to leverage all the responsibility Jesus gives to us, because we have more than just gospel responsibility. We have gospel responsibility. Don't want to take that away, but we have a lot of other responsibilities too that are outlined by Jesus that we're meant to do. And so I think when we're owning all of that, we're seeing it as kind of like a warehouse of different things that we try to do, and then doing some of these things in this list in these ways. It is curious. It is out of the norm. It is not what people expect out of religion always, especially in today's climate, like I said, where they are more primed than ever to get just the worst press of religion, of that, some of which is earned bad press. All the more we have to disrupt stereotypes. We need to keep our cool. We need to be loving even of our critics. We need to even use criticism as an opportunity to lean in and say, hey, unpack that criticism. Let me see if I can clear some stuff up. Let me see if I can be a safe space for you, even in your criticism, because that's how we get mileage. That's the real world ways. Like I think sometimes we get into these kind of academic theological answers or ways or postures, and I go, but man, life is in the messy spaces, and winning people over in things is in the messy ways we try to do it, or in the human ways we try to do it, or in the sincere ways we try to do it. And so I think if we're kind of students in this way and we're seeking to do things in this measure, well, then you know the thing again, as I say every week, I think that's the way we're going to be even more effective everyday missionaries.